The air shimmered like a mirage under the twin suns of Xyrax 7. And there she stood, Princess Leora Valeth. Her presence was magnetic, almost otherworldly, as if the universe itself had conspired to craft her from starlight and dreams. She was tall for an alien, with skin that glowed faintly in hues of lavender and silver, and eyes so deep they seemed to hold galaxies within them. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of shimmering platinum, catching the light like liquid moonbeams. Every movement she made radiated grace, but it wasn't just beauty that defined her. It was power. Power cloaked in elegance, wrapped tightly around her slender frame like the armor she wore. And what armor it was! It wasn't merely functional. It was art, forged by the finest artisans of her homeworld. The suit gleamed with intricate engravings that told stories older than time itself. Swirling patterns danced across its surface, shifting colors depending on the angle of the light. The material was unknown to humans, a blend of advanced technology and ancient magic, impenetrable yet lightweight enough to allow fluid motion. But more than anything, the armor symbolized her role. Protector of her people, warrior queen-in-waiting, bearer of hope against interstellar threats. Yet today, the princess looked unusually troubled. Standing at the edge of the grand hall aboard her flagship, the Etheris, she stared out at the endless expanse of stars beyond the viewport. Her fingers traced absent minds over one of the pauldrons resting on the table beside her. This wasn't just any piece of equipment. It was part of her legacy, a relic passed down through generations of rulers. And now it needed care, not just polishing or repairs either, something far deeper, something delicate. Her lips pressed together into a thin line, frustration flickering in her violet eyes. "It's not supposed to be this way," she murmured softly, though no one else was present to hear. Armor like hers required specialized attention, maintenance rituals steeped in tradition. Back home, only the most skilled artisans could handle such work. Yet here she was, stranded light years away from Xyrax 7, surrounded by allies who lacked both the knowledge and tools necessary to restore it properly. Leora sighed, turning to face the room again. Around her, holographic displays floated midair, showing schematics of various Terran technologies scavenged during their brief alliance with Earth's forces. They'd been magnificent discoveries, full of promise, but none held answers for her predicament. Without proper care, the armor would begin to degrade, losing not just its luster but also its protective capabilities. Worse still, letting it fall into disrepair felt like a betrayal of everything her lineage stood for. She glanced toward the door, where soft footsteps approached. One of her advisors entered hesitantly, bowing low before speaking. "Your Highness, we've exhausted all options among our crew. Perhaps we must consider seeking help elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Leora echoed sharply, raising an eyebrow. "You mean asking outsiders? Humans? They're resourceful," the advisor offered cautiously, "and some have proven trustworthy. If we explain the situation carefully—" "No," her tone cut him off like a blade slicing through silence. "This armor is sacred. It cannot fall into the hands of those who do not understand its significance." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her mind. Time was running out. Already, tiny fractures marred the surface of the breastplate, subtle signs of wear invisible to untrained eyes but glaringly obvious to her. What choice did she truly have? As the advisor retreated, leaving her alone once more, Leora sank onto a nearby bench, cradling her head in her hands. The weight of leadership pressed heavily upon her shoulders, heavier than any armor ever could. Somewhere in the recesses of her thoughts, a question lingered. Was pride worth risking failure? Or should desperation lead her to trust, even if it meant placing faith in someone entirely unexpected? Commander Ethan Drake wasn't exactly what you'd call a typical soldier. Sure, he wore the uniform well enough. Crisp navy blue jumpsuit adorned with insignias earned through years of service, but his demeanor set him apart from the rest. Where others carried themselves with rigid discipline, Ethan moved with an easygoing looseness, his broad shoulders relaxed and his smile ready to disarm anyone foolish enough to challenge him. He was the kind of guy who could diffuse tension with a joke, even in the middle of a firefight which had saved his life and probably others, more times than he cared to count. Born and raised in the sprawling megacities of Earth, Ethan grew up fascinated by stories of the cosmos long before humanity had ventured beyond its own solar system. As a kid, he'd spend hours lying on the roof of his family's apartment building, staring up at the stars and dreaming of adventures among them. When the Intergalactic Alliance opened recruitment to humans decades later, Ethan signed up without hesitation. At first, his peers dismissed him as just another dreamer, too idealistic for the harsh realities of space combat. But it didn't take long for them to realize how wrong they were. Ethan's rise through the ranks wasn't meteoric, but it was steady. What he lacked in raw aggression, he made up for with ingenuity and heart. During one particularly brutal skirmish against rogue mercenaries near the Orion Belt, when half his squad lay pinned down by enemy fire, Ethan devised a daring plan using nothing but a malfunctioning drone and some scrap metal. His quick thinking turned the tide of battle, earning him not only commendations but also respect from even the most hardened veterans. Over time, he became known less for following orders blindly and more for finding creative solutions where others saw only dead ends. Now stationed aboard the human warship Aegis Dawn, Ethan served as part of a joint task force working alongside various alien species, including the enigmatic Zyraxians. While many of his comrades struggled to bridge cultural gaps, Ethan thrived in these situations. Whether it was learning basic phrases in alien languages or sharing Earth delicacies during downtime, he approached every interaction with genuine curiosity and humor. To say he was popular among the crew would be an understatement. Everyone seemed to know Commander Drake, whether because he'd helped them fix a busted engine or simply cracked a joke that brightened their day. So when word spread that Princess Leora Valeth herself was looking for volunteers to assist with something unspecified, Ethan found himself intrigued despite the whispers of danger surrounding the request. Most of his fellow soldiers avoided entanglements with royalty, especially alien royalty, fearing complications they couldn't anticipate. But Ethan? Well, Ethan had never been one to shy away from a challenge or an opportunity to prove himself useful. "You sure about this?" asked Lieutenant Harper, narrowing her eyes skeptically as Ethan adjusted the straps of his utility belt. "I mean, it's not every day you get summoned by an actual princess. Sounds kind of fishy if you ask me." "Fishy?" Ethan chuckled, slinging a toolkit over his shoulder. "Relax, Harper. Worst case scenario, I end up scrubbing floors or something. Best case? Maybe I learn a thing or two about Zyraxian tech. Either way, beats sitting around waiting for the next patrol shift." Harper crossed her arms, unconvinced. "Still doesn't explain why you volunteered. You're not exactly Mr. Diplomatic, you know." He grinned, leaning casually against the bulkhead. "Maybe I just wanted to see what all the fuss is about. Besides, someone's got to keep things interesting around here." With that, he gave her a mock salute and headed toward the docking bay where the Zyraxian delegation awaited. Little did he know, this decision would lead him straight into the orbit of a woman, and a mission, unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. When Ethan stepped onto the sleek, metallic deck of the Aetheris, he immediately felt out of place. The ship hummed with an energy unlike anything he'd experienced aboard human vessels, a soft vibration that seemed to resonate in his chest. Alien symbols glowed faintly along the walls, pulsating in sync with the rhythm of the engines. Crew members bustled past him, their movements precise and purposeful, clad in uniforms that shimmered like liquid mercury. Despite his confidence, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, an earthling dropped into a world where he didn't quite belong. He followed the directions given to him by a stoic Zyraxian officer, navigating corridors that twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Eventually, he arrived at a large chamber bathed in soft, golden light. There, standing amidst holographic projections of star maps and tactical data, was Princess Leora. She turned to face him as he entered, her piercing violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him momentarily forget how to breathe. "Commander Drake," she began, her voice smooth yet commanding, carrying just the slightest hint of curiosity. "You are human?" "That's right, Your Highness," Ethan replied, snapping to attention but keeping his tone light. 100% Terran-born and raised. Though I gotta admit, your ship makes ours look like tin cans." A flicker of amusement crossed her features, though she quickly masked it. "Your reputation precedes you, Commander. Resourceful, unconventional, some might say reckless." She paused, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. "Why did you volunteer for this assignment?" Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of her question. "Honestly, figured I could help. Plus, it sounded like an adventure. Always up for those." Her gaze sharpened, skepticism mingling with intrigue. "An adventure," she repeated slowly, as though tasting the word. "Do you understand the gravity of what you are undertaking? This is no mere task. It involves safeguarding something irreplaceable." I get it, Ethan said earnestly, stepping closer. You wouldn't trust just anyone with something this important. But maybe that's why you should trust me. Sometimes the best solutions come from someone who doesn't follow the usual rules. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a mix of suspicion and cautious optimism. Finally, Leora exhaled softly, her expression softening ever so slightly. Very well, she said, gesturing toward a nearby pedestal where pieces of her armor lay displayed. Show me what you can do. As Ethan approached the armor, his initial awe gave way to practicality. He ran his fingers lightly over the surface, marveling at its texture. Smooth yet impossibly strong. Tiny fractures spiderwebbed across certain sections, but they weren't visible unless you knew where to look. He glanced back at Leora, who watched him intently, arms crossed. So, he said, pulling out a small diagnostic scanner from his toolkit. What kind of maintenance does this usually require? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Traditionally, it is entrusted to master artisans trained since childhood. They use techniques passed down through generations, blending craftsmanship with spiritual practices. Spiritual practices? Ethan echoed, raising an eyebrow. Like meditation? Chants? Incense? She bristled visibly. Do not mock our traditions, Commander. This armor is more than metal. It is a symbol of my duty, my heritage. Treat it with respect. Hey, no offense meant, Ethan replied quickly, holding up his hands in surrender. Just trying to understand. Look, I may not have centuries of training, but I've patched up plenty of gear in my time. Let me try something simple first. Okay? Reluctantly, she nodded, stepping aside to give him space. Ethan crouched down, examining the damaged areas more closely. Using the scanner, he identified stress points and microfractures invisible to the naked eye. Then, rummaging through his toolkit, he pulled out a vial of nanogel, a versatile repair compound used widely in human engineering. This stuff works wonders on dents and cracks, he explained, squirting a small amount onto his gloved palm. Carefully, he applied it to one of the fractures, watching as the gel seeped into the material and began repairing the damage. Almost instantly, the affected area smoothed out, regaining its original luster. Leora leaned forward, her skepticism giving way to fascination. How does it work? Nanobots, Ethan said with a grin. Tiny machines that rebuild things at a molecular level. Pretty cool. Huh. Cool? She murmured, testing the word as if it were foreign. Then, after a beat, she added, impressive. Encouraged, Ethan continued working, explaining each step as he went. He described how different compounds interacted with various materials, shared anecdotes about makeshift repairs during battles, and even cracked a few jokes to lighten the mood. To his surprise, Leora listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering insights based on her own knowledge of the armor's composition. At one point, while attempting to polish a particularly stubborn scuff mark, Ethan accidentally knocked over a container of solvent. It spilled across the floor, sending both of them scrambling to clean it up. In the chaos, their hands brushed briefly, and Ethan froze, startled by the warmth of her touch despite the coolness of her skin. Leora met his gaze, her cheeks tinged with the faintest hint of color. Careful, she chided, though there was no real bite in her words. This is hardly the behavior of a professional artisan. Yeah, well, Ethan shot back with a sheepish smile. Nobody said I was perfect. Despite the mishap, progress was undeniable. By the time they finished, the armor gleamed brighter than it had in weeks. Leora inspected it thoroughly, running her fingers over every inch. When she finally looked up at Ethan, her expression was unreadable, but there was a new warmth in her eyes. You have done well, she admitted grudgingly. Perhaps better than I expected. Ethan grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Told you I could handle it. Her lips curved upward in the barest hint of a smile. Indeed. However, this is only the beginning. There is much more to learn, and much more at stake. Before Ethan could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship, cutting through the calm like a knife. Red lights flashed overhead, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Both Ethan and Leora sprang to their feet, instinctively reaching for weapons neither of them carried. What's happening? Ethan demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Leora's face darkened, her regal composure slipping for the first time. Intruders, she said grimly. Hostile forces have breached our perimeter. The sudden burst of alarms sent the entire crew of the Aetheris scrambling into action. Within moments, the once serene halls erupted into controlled chaos as Ziraxian soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Their movements synchronized like clockwork. Orders barked through communication channels, overlapping with the shrill wail of sirens. Ethan, still reeling from the abrupt shift in atmosphere, found himself swept along with the tide of urgency. "Stay close," Leora commanded tersely, grabbing a plasma rifle from a nearby weapons rack. She tossed another to Ethan, who caught it awkwardly, fumbling with its unfamiliar design. "This weapon requires precision, not brute force. Aim carefully." He nodded, gripping the rifle tighter as adrenaline surged through his veins. Together, they sprinted down the corridor, joining a group of armored Ziraxian warriors converging on the source of the breach. The air grew thick with tension, punctuated by distant explosions that rattled the ship's hull. Each step felt heavier than the last, anticipation coiling tightly in Ethan's stomach. They reached the main cargo bay just as the invaders made their move. Clad in black, angular armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the attackers poured through a jagged hole torn in the side of the ship. Their weapons fired beams of concentrated energy, cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Sparks flew as shots ricocheted off metallic surfaces, forcing Ethan and the others to duck for cover. "Who are these guys?" Ethan shouted over the din, crouching behind a stack of crates alongside Leora. "Mercenaries," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "Scavengers preying on vulnerable ships. They must have tracked us after our last engagement." "Well, they picked the wrong day to show up," Ethan muttered, peeking around the corner to assess the situation. The mercenaries had already secured a foothold, pinning the defenders behind makeshift barricades. If they didn't act soon, the intruders would gain control of the bay, and potentially the entire ship. "We need to flank them," Leora declared, her eyes scanning the battlefield with calculated precision. "Their formation is weakest on the left flank. If we can draw their attention elsewhere, a small team can circle around and strike from behind." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sounds risky. Got a plan for drawing their attention?" A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face. "Leave that to me." Without waiting for further discussion, Leora leaped out from behind cover, firing her plasma rifle with pinpoint accuracy. Her shots struck true, taking down 2 mercenaries in quick succession. The rest turned their focus toward her, unleashing a barrage of retaliatory fire. Ethan winced as bolts of energy whizzed past her head, but she moved with astonishing agility, weaving through the chaos like a dancer in a storm. "Now," she called, signaling the rest of the team to advance. Ethan didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, he darted out from his position, following Leora's lead. His lack of familiarity with the weapon proved challenging. He overshot several times, narrowly missing targets, but sheer determination kept him moving forward. Behind him, the Ziraxian warriors formed a tight-knit unit, providing covering fire as they pushed deeper into the fray. The battle raged on, a blur of motion and noise. At one point, Ethan found himself face-to-face with a towering mercenary wielding a massive melee weapon. Panic surged through him, but instinct took over. Ducking under a sweeping strike, he rolled to the side and landed a lucky shot, disabling the attacker's weapon arm. Breathing hard, he scrambled back to his feet, only to find Leora standing beside him, her expression unreadable. "Not bad for a human," she quipped, firing another round past his shoulder to take out an approaching enemy. "Thanks," Ethan gasped, grinning despite himself. "Glad to know you're impressed." Their banter was cut short as reinforcements arrived, tipping the scales in their favor. The remaining mercenaries began retreating, dragging their wounded comrades toward the breach. Ethan and Leora exchanged a glance, silently agreeing to press the advantage. Leading the charge, they pursued the fleeing enemies, determined to drive them off the ship entirely. As the final wave of intruders disappeared into the void outside, the alarms ceased, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Ethan leaned against a wall, panting heavily, his body aching from exertion. Around him, the surviving crew members tended to injuries and assessed the damage. Despite the exhaustion weighing him down, a sense of triumph bubbled beneath the surface. Leora approached him, her armor scorched and dented but still radiant. For the first time since they'd met, she looked genuinely pleased. "You fought well," she said simply, extending a hand. "Thank you." Ethan shook it, returning her smile. Anytime, Your Highness. Though next time, maybe we stick to fixing armor instead of dodging laser blasts. To his surprise, she laughed. A rich, melodic sound that filled the room. Agreed. Now, let us see if your repairs held up during all this excitement. Side by side, they returned to the chamber where the armor lay waiting, unaware of the trials and bonds that lay ahead. After the adrenaline-fueled battle subsided, Ethan and Leora found themselves back in the quiet chamber where their peculiar partnership had begun. The contrast between the chaos of combat and the serene stillness of the room was almost surreal. As they surveyed the armor sprawled across the pedestal, Ethan couldn't help but chuckle softly. "Well, looks like your baby survived the fight," he remarked, nodding toward the gleaming suit. Indeed, the repairs he'd made earlier held firm, despite the intense vibrations and occasional stray energy blasts that had rocked the ship during the skirmish. If anything, the armor seemed to shine brighter now, as though it had absorbed some of the tension and emerged stronger for it. Leora tilted her head, inspecting the armor with a critical eye. "Your methods were unconventional yet effective," she admitted, her tone softer than usual. There was a flicker of something akin to admiration in her voice, though she masked it quickly with a neutral expression. "Perhaps there is merit in embracing flexibility." Ethan smirked, leaning casually against the edge of the pedestal. "Flexibility? Coming from you, that's practically high praise. Should I start expecting medals or parades in my honor?" Her lips twitched, fighting back what might have been the beginnings of a smile. "Do not let this newfound success inflate your ego, Commander. We are far from done here." "Fair enough," he conceded, straightening up. "But hey, teamwork makes the dream work, right? Speaking of which," he paused, scratching the back of his neck thoughtfully. "You handled yourself pretty damn well out there. All that fancy footwork and precision shooting. I think you might actually scare me if we weren't on the same side." She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "And what makes you believe I would not defeat you regardless?" "Oh, I don't doubt it," Ethan replied with mock seriousness. "But seriously, where'd you learn moves like that?" "Army boot camp back on Zyrax 7. Leora hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the glowing symbols etched into the walls. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, her usual poise giving way to something more vulnerable. "It is tradition among my people," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "Every heir to the throne undergoes rigorous training, not just in combat, but in strategy, diplomacy, survival. From the day I could walk, I was taught to protect not only myself but also those who depend on me." Ethan studied her profile, noting the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. Beneath the regal exterior, she carried burdens he could only begin to imagine. Slowly he nodded. "Sounds tough. No wonder you're so good at bossing people around." That earned him a sharp glance, though there was no real anger behind it. "Are you mocking me again, Commander?" "Maybe a little," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "But honestly, I'm impressed. Takes guts to lead like that, especially when lives are on the line." Her expression softened slightly, though she maintained her composure. "Leadership is not about glory," she said firmly. "It is about responsibility, sacrifice, doing whatever must be done, even when it feels impossible." Ethan mulled over her words, sensing the weight behind them. He'd seen glimpses of that responsibility firsthand, the way she'd risked her life to draw enemy fire, the careful consideration she put into every decision. It struck him then how much they shared, despite their vastly different backgrounds. Both leaders in their own ways, both driven by a desire to protect others, even if it meant stepping outside their comfort zones. "You know," he said after a pause, "for someone who claims humans don't understand your traditions, you seem awfully willing to adapt when push comes to shove." Her jaw tightened, and she turned away, pacing slowly around the pedestal. "Adaptation does not equate to acceptance," she countered. "There is a difference between necessity and compromise." "Sure," Ethan agreed easily. "But isn't compromise kind of the whole point of alliances? Working together, even when it's hard. Hell, if I hadn't adapted to alien tech half the time, I'd still be stuck fixing busted drones with duct tape." That drew a reluctant laugh from her, the sound surprising them both. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. "Perhaps you are not entirely without merit, Commander Drake." "High praise indeed," he teased, bowing exaggeratedly. "Should I curtsy now or save it for later?" Before she could respond, the door slid open, admitting one of her advisors. The man bowed deeply, addressing Leora with urgent tones. "Your Highness, reports indicate additional hostiles en route. Reinforcements likely dispatched by the same faction." Leora's expression hardened instantly, all traces of levity vanishing. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered sharply. "We cannot afford another ambush." "Yes, Your Highness," the advisor replied before hurrying off. Ethan frowned, stepping closer. "Looks like we're not out of the woods yet." "No," Leora agreed grimly, "but we will prevail. Together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ethan nodded, resolve settling firmly in his chest. Whatever came next, he realized, they'd face it side by side, and somehow that made the uncertainty feel a little less daunting. As preparations intensified across the Etherius, Ethan found himself thrust into a whirlwind of activity. The looming threat of reinforcements forced the crew to mobilize rapidly, leaving little room for rest or reflection. Yet amid the organized chaos, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing connection between himself and Leora. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A shared glance here, a fleeting smile there, but it carried a depth that transcended mere camaraderie. Their bond deepened as they worked together, strategizing and coordinating defenses against the impending attack. Leora relied on Ethan's ingenuity, valuing his fresh perspective and innovative solutions. In turn, Ethan learned to appreciate the intricacies of Ziraxian culture, gaining insight into traditions and protocols that initially baffled him. Through countless late-night discussions and impromptu brainstorming sessions, they discovered common ground, forging a partnership rooted in mutual respect and trust. Emotionally, Ethan felt a stirring within him that he hadn't anticipated. Initially drawn to Leora's beauty and regal bearing, he soon found himself captivated by her strength and vulnerability. Her unwavering dedication to her people inspired him, reminding him of his own reasons for serving. Conversations that began with technical details about armor repair often veered into personal territory, revealing layers of her character that few outsiders ever witnessed. These moments created a closeness that neither could deny, though neither dared to voice it aloud. Humor became their bridge, easing tensions and lightening the oppressive weight of their responsibilities. Ethan's knack for finding levity in dire situations brought a spark of joy to Leora's otherwise disciplined demeanor. Jokes about human idioms and playful jabs at each other's quirks fostered a sense of ease that permeated their interactions. Laughter echoed through the corridors, a testament to their evolving relationship. Dramatically, their dynamic shifted as external pressures mounted. Each successful defense bolstered their confidence in one another, solidifying their roles as equals in the fight. Moments of crisis revealed hidden strengths, with Leora demonstrating remarkable resilience and Ethan showcasing unparalleled resourcefulness. Together, they navigated challenges that tested their limits, emerging stronger with each victory. On the battlefield, their synergy was undeniable. Coordinated attacks and seamless communication turned potential disasters into triumphs. Ethan's adaptability complemented Leora's strategic brilliance, resulting in tactics that confused and overwhelmed their adversaries. Side by side, they led charges and executed maneuvers with precision, their unity inspiring those around them. Soldiers rallied behind them, emboldened by the sight of their leaders standing united against overwhelming odds. Through it all, their journey was marked by growth, not just individually but collectively. They transformed from reluctant allies into steadfast companions, bound by shared experiences and unspoken understanding. As they prepared for the next wave of conflict, Ethan and Leora stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Their story was far from over, but one thing was certain. They would face it together. As the final battle loomed, the tension aboard the Etherius was palpable. The reinforcements sent by the mercenaries were larger and more advanced than anyone had anticipated. Dozens of sleek, black ships surrounded the Ziraxian flagship, their weapons primed and ready to strike. Alarms blared incessantly, and the hum of energy shields filled every corner of the vessel. It was clear that this fight would determine not just their survival but the fate of countless lives depending on them. Leora stood at the helm of the bridge, her armor gleaming under the dim red lights of the alert system. Her expression was resolute, yet there was a flicker of something softer in her eyes as she glanced at Ethan. He stood beside her, his hands gripping the railing as he studied the tactical displays hovering before them. Together, they exhaled in unison, silently acknowledging the enormity of what lay ahead. "We can't hold them off forever," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice carried none of its usual humor or lightheartedness, only grim determination. But we don't have to. We just need to outlast them. Leora nodded, her gaze fixed on the swarm of enemy ships closing in. Then let us make every moment count. The ensuing battle was nothing short of chaos. Explosions lit up the void outside as plasma cannons fired relentlessly, filling space with streaks of light and debris. The Aetherus shuddered violently under the barrage, forcing everyone to cling to whatever stability they could find. Leora barked orders with precision, directing her crew to target weak points in the enemy formation, while Ethan coordinated counterattacks using improvised tactics honed from years of human ingenuity. At one point, disaster struck when a stray torpedo breached the ship's outer hull, sending oxygen rushing into the vacuum. A group of mercenaries seized the opportunity, infiltrating through the damaged section and threatening to overrun the engineering bay, a critical area that, if compromised, would leave the entire ship vulnerable. "I'll go," Ethan volunteered without hesitation, grabbing his rifle and strapping on additional gear. "You stay here and keep things running." "No," Leora countered sharply, already moving toward the door. "I am coming with you." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. There was no room for negotiation, not when her people's lives hung in the balance. Without another word, they raced toward the breach, leading a small team of Xeraxian warriors into the fray. The corridors leading to the engineering bay were narrow and labyrinthine, creating a claustrophobic battleground where every step felt like a gamble. Mercenaries lurked around every corner, their weapons blazing as they tried to overwhelm the defenders. Ethan and Leora moved in perfect sync, covering each other with practiced ease. She fired precise shots that took down enemies with brutal efficiency, while he used clever distractions and quick thinking to buy them precious seconds. When they finally reached the engineering bay, the scene was dire. Several crew members lay wounded, and the mercenaries had nearly disabled the core systems. With time running out, Ethan devised a risky plan. Overload the backup power conduits to create an electromagnetic pulse that would disable all nearby electronics, including their own weapons. It was dangerous, but it might buy them enough time to regain control. "Do it," Leora commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "I will cover you." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. As he worked frantically to reroute the power systems, Leora positioned herself between him and the advancing mercenaries. Her movements were fluid and graceful, almost like a dance, as she deflected bolts of energy and returned fire with lethal accuracy. But even she couldn't hold them off indefinitely. Just as the first mercenary broke through her defenses, Ethan shouted, "Now!" With a deafening roar, the pulse surged through the room, plunging everything into darkness. The mercenaries' weapons sputtered and died, leaving them disoriented and vulnerable. Seizing the opportunity, Leora and her team swiftly neutralized the remaining threats, securing the area once and for all. When the lights flickered back on, Ethan slumped against the wall, exhausted but triumphant. Leora knelt beside him, her breathing heavy but her eyes shining with relief. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of what they'd accomplished sinking in. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We saved each other," Ethan corrected, smiling weakly. "Teamwork, remember?" She smiled back, and in that smile he saw something new, something deeper than gratitude or admiration. It was love, plain and simple, written across her face in a way she could no longer hide. In the days that followed, the immediate threat passed, and peace slowly returned to the Aetherus. Repairs were underway, and the crew began to heal both physically and emotionally. Yet amidst the recovery, a quiet shift occurred between Leora and Ethan. What had started as mutual respect and camaraderie blossomed into something far greater, an undeniable connection that neither could deny any longer. One evening, as the twin suns of Xerax 7 cast a golden glow over the observation deck, Leora approached Ethan. She wore a simple gown instead of her armor, her hair cascading freely down her back. In her hand, she held a small, intricately carved box, the same one that had once contained tools Ethan used to repair her armor. "Ethan Drake," she began, her voice steady yet tinged with nervousness. "You came into my life unexpectedly, challenging everything I thought I knew about trust, adaptability, and love." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Will you take care of me and my armor for the rest of our lives?" For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Then, grinning broadly, he replied, "Yes, absolutely yes." They married soon after, blending their cultures in a ceremony that celebrated both Earth and Xeraxian traditions. Over the years, they built a life together, a family filled with laughter, adventure, and boundless love. Their children inherited the best of both worlds, Ethan's creativity and humor alongside Leora's strength and grace. And so, the young gorgeous alien princess and the resourceful human guard lived happily ever after, proving that sometimes, the most extraordinary stories begin with something as simple as a piece of armor.